All right, so today we're going to talk to you about federalism. The first thing is just what is federalism? It's pretty simple. It's just the system that our government uses that separates the powers between states and the federal government. It's laid out pretty clearly in Articles 1, 4, and 6, as well as the 10th Amendment, and it just sets out the basic principles of the way that our government runs with its states, okay? So the first article lays out our legislative branch and what their powers are. They range from printing money all the way to controlling interstate commerce. They do that with the Commerce Clause, that is Section 1, Clause 8, and they can basically control any movement of goods across state lines or federal lines, and we'll talk about that here in a second and how they've used that recently. Gibson v. Ogden was one of the first times it was ever used. That was all the way back in 1824, and that was over steamboats running between New York and New Jersey. Aaron Ogden was given a monopoly by the state of New York, and Thomas Gibbons was given a monopoly by Congress. So when it came down to it, there was a lawsuit by Aaron Ogden. It went through New York, where he was found to be in the right, and they told Thomas Gibbons to stop. Gibbons appealed, goes to the Supreme Court, where they stated that because federal law supersedes state law, and because the federal government controls interstate commerce, that they had the right to give out the license, not the state of New York. So Gibbons ends up winning, and that was all the way back in 1824. Like I said, the very first time that was ever seen. Then we have Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, the Necessary and Proper Clause, that states that the government has the right to do anything that they deem to be necessary and proper in doing their other duties. So because the government prints money, they have to be able to establish that money and give it out to people. That actually takes place through banking. So almost every bank is now federally backed. But in the earlier years of the country, that wasn't always the case. So we ended up with a case called McCulloch v. Maryland. That was all the way in 1816. And McCulloch, he was just a cashier at the Second National Bank of the United States. It was established after the First National Bank lost its charter, and he refused to pay taxes to the state of Maryland, who did not want that bank in Maryland. Now again, that goes to the courts in Maryland, where they found in favor of the guy, and then he appeals. It goes to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court found that, well, actually they found two rulings. They found that, first off, states don't have the right to tax the federal government, and second off, the power to tax is the power to destroy, and because it could be used to hurt the federal government, states don't have the ability to tax the federal government. Now that again comes because of the Necessary and Proper Clause. So that takes us all the way to Article 4, Section 1, where we have the Full Faith and Credit Clause. That one's actually pretty interesting. The Full Faith and Credit Clause says that any documents given by one state are valid in every other state. Now, we saw a big push with that in Loving, Virginia. That was in 1967, where Richard Loving got married to a woman by the name of Mildred Jeter Loving. So, what makes that different? Well, they were a mixed-race couple. And at the time, that was completely illegal in most states, but they got married in Washington, D.C., where it was legal. On returning to Virginia, they were arrested and sentenced to 1 year in prison. Now, once that went to the Supreme Court, they found that their marriage was constitutional and that the state of Virginia, as well as every other state in the country, had to recognize mixed-race couples. And that was, like I said, all the way back in 1967 when it goes through. And then we have Section 2, Clause 1, which is the Privileges and Immunities Clause. And it states that the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of the citizens in several states, meaning that your rights don't change when you cross state lines. That one, again, is pretty cut and dry. Now, Article 6, we have the Supremacy Clause. This states that any thing about this is called Supremacy Clause states that any laws, federal laws, supersede state laws, meaning that a federal law has more power than state laws. So if state law and federal law go against each other, federal law always wins. And then we have the 10th Amendment. The powers not delegated by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the different kinds of federalism. We have dual federalism, and then we have cooperative federalism. So dual federalism is what we've used for the majority of the time in the United States. It really separates federal and state government. These are your responsibilities, these are ours. The two don't really mix. And we use that all the way up until the New Deal that was signed by FDR in between 1933 and 1938 to counteract the Great Depression. That took us all the way to cooperative federalism. Cooperative federalism is when the federal government plays a bigger role in what the states do. One of the main ways that they end up doing that is through grants. Okay, and there are two different kinds of grants the federal government gives out. Categorical grants, which make up about 90% of all grants given out by the federal government. Congress prefers these, and they spell out exactly how money is supposed to be used. So if they were saying, here's $1 billion, you have to spend it to build schools, that money has to be spent just to build schools. They also have block grants, which states prefer. Block grants would say this money needs to be used for education, but you can use it in any way you see necessary to make education better, whether that be building schools, repairing schools, buying new things, paying teachers more money, building new roads in front of the schools. There's a lot more leeway in how block grants are used. There is one other way that the federal government tends to get states to do things, and that is through mandates. Now, mandates don't always come from money, but mandates always have to be done. Now, sometimes those are good things, but states dislike them, like the Americans with Disabilities Act that was passed in 1990. The reason they don't like them is because it can cost a state a lot of money, and they don't get any help from the federal government. The Americans with Disabilities Act actually made it so that federal and state government buildings had to have wheelchair ramps and stuff like that. I don't think anybody disagrees with that, but it did cost states a lot of money, so not a lot of them were really happy about having to do that. Now, sometimes those mandates come with stipulations if they don't do them. So we have the National Minimum Drinking Age Act of 1984, when the drinking age was changed from 18 to 21 under Ronald Reagan. And the way that they did that is they told states that unless they changed the drinking age to 21, that they wouldn't get all their federal funding to build roads. So by 1986, all states had changed the minimum drinking age to 21. Not like that, we have the Tobacco 21 Act. Now, it's again the federal government telling states what they have to do. That was changing the smoking age from 18 to 21. That happened in 2019, but they didn't use a mandate. What they did was attach a rider onto the 2019 spending bill. If you don't know what those are, it's how we fund our government. If they don't get signed, then we have government shutdown. So they said that the age changes to 21, and the reason that they were doing that is through something called the Commerce Clause, which we talked about earlier, right? In that, they established that the federal government has the ability to regulate anything going across state lines, which is kind of a dangerous precedent when you think about it, because nowadays pretty much everything goes across state lines. And there are certain things that states and the federal government adamantly disagree on, but continue anyways. Look at marijuana legalization. Right now, 48 out of 50 states, Nebraska and Idaho being the only exceptions, have some sort of marijuana policy in their state that allows its use, even the state of Texas, although here it is just for medical purposes. But 48 out of 50 states are going against the federal government, and up until now, they haven't been able to stop it. That started with California. They did try and fight with the DEA, but their look on marijuana as far as state use goes now has been pretty lax over the last several years. Texas is a really independent state, and it hasn't always seen eye to eye on the federal things with the federal government. Now, because of that, we always see a lot of challenges coming out of Texas. One of the first ones I'm going to talk about is immigration. So the Texas Senate passed Bill 4, SB 4, banning sanctuary cities in the state. They also challenged DACA under Obama. Now, both of those things went to the Supreme Court and were seen and had rulings on them already. They've gone against environmental regulations, claiming that it hurts income in the state. They went against the Affordable Health Care Act and did not expand Medicaid in the state. They've been at the forefront of abortion since Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade actually came out of Texas in 1973. Now, more recently, since that ruling has been overturned, in 2021, a bill has been signed that bans abortion after 6 weeks and allows people to be taken to court if they leave the state to get an abortion as well. There's several other things that Texas has gotten into over the years. You can see some of those in your text, but in general, they do this through the 10th Amendment, asserting that the powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the state. They're claiming that the state is doing what it can and the federal government is overstepping their boundaries by going against state rulings. Now, the impact of federalism on the state is pretty much the same as all other states. These disputes have shaped the national conversation about the division of power between states and the federal government. They've influenced landmark Supreme Court rulings, and then it's really had a lot to do with the political identity of Texas. Texas's challenges often reflect its conservative political stances and its prioritization for limited government, because throughout the Texas Constitution, one of the main things that they push for is a very limited government, and Texas has done that since it was its own republic. Texas is not a big fan of federal intervention, and that shows in the policies that they have in the state and the policies by the federal government that are challenged by the state of Texas. I know this was pretty quick today. Read your chapter. You've got a quiz and a discussion board, and I will talk to you guys next week.